So why am I talking to you? Nobody's listening. I don't know whether you've all been looking at that picture that was on the thing or whether you saw a woman or a saxophonist. Maybe you didn't see anything at all if you weren't looking. There are loads of psychological studies, all that kind of stuff, that tell you what you're supposed to look at. Whether my point really is just to show that people look at things differently. Not everybody sees the same thing. Have you ever recruited somebody, asked them to do something, and they've a job? They said, "Yeah, I can do that," and you found they've done something completely different. I once bought a flower shop, as you do, and the chap who I was buying it from said that it was managed, and I talked to the manager, and he said, "Yeah, I can manage things, I can do blah blah blah," and she ran processes. She didn't manage the job in the end. And that flower shop cost me the price of a Ferrari for 2 years while I ran it. And then so instead of having a Ferrari, I had a flower shop. Hey, who knew? Not my finest hour, but it's because I was hoping it was going to be managed. They told me it was managed, and that's what I wanted to hear. So have you ever made a request to someone thinking they've agreed to do it and they haven't? Good job Jules is around the corner, because when I was setting this talk up, Jules was doing a bit of editing of my copy and my title and blah, blah, and I asked Jules if she would let me check anything she put out before we put it out, because it's my material. Next thing I know, there's some rewritten stuff sitting on a website somewhere and I hadn't seen it. I thought Jules had agreed. Jules actually thought she'd agreed she was going to do it, and somehow or another it didn't happen. Just mean, sometimes people don't always, even when they say I agree, they don't. Or maybe you've had a conversation with somebody and you've asked a question and you haven't actually, they answer the question you're not asking. Happens to me a lot. That's my world. I live in that world. I don't really think I speak English some of the time, like Americans or Geordies maybe, but there's a version of English called Davidish, and I'm the only person who speaks it. I find it really frustrating when I'm talking to people and I keep having to say that, well, I think saying the same thing, John knows I do this, and I keep repeating myself slightly differently because the person's not answering the question, I think, and the other person's getting more and more frustrated, aren't they, John, about my lack of, taking on board what they're saying, and it's really just, part of the way it is. So what did I decide to do? I thought maybe it'd be a good idea if I did a bit of learning. And this presentation is really coming out of what I've learned. I'm like an alcoholic. I try every day. I get up in the morning and say, David, you can do this better, but I have learned some stuff and I'm trying to implement it. I'm not great at it, but I'm getting there, and I thought I'd share. So what am I hoping to do? Well, I'm hoping to offer you a framework of how the mind works. Don't worry, it's not long. It's just how I see it to help you get into context. Introduce 4 types of bias that I think impact how people interpret what I'm saying. Offer a few insights that might help us all communicate effectively. And you never know, with a bit of luck, I might even set you on your way to being 30% more productive. Of that more later. So here we go, the human mind. This is what, you don't know if any of you've seen the book by Professor Steve. So the chimp paradox, do you know it? I really like this. I think it's a great kind of thing. There's loads of stuff in there about how to think and cope with your own brain and all that kind of stuff. That's not my point in raising it now. It's just I'm focusing on the computer, but in summary, it's based on you being part human, part chimp, part computer. And the human bit of you is the rational, logical bit that thinks about stuff and comes up with the right answers to everything, and always thinks long term. You have plans, all that kind of stuff. The chimp part of you is the kind of emotional, react quickly, oh look, there's a banana, I want it, I'll take it kind of response. Or there's some predator, run off, scream, shout. And the computer is the pre-programmed bit. It's the bulk of what you do. It's mainly unconscious. It's the part of your brain that makes you function without worrying about the time it takes to respond. You don't have to. And this, for me, is where where biases live. A lot of them are unconscious, and you can only overcome it if you try and reprogram your computer. So, bias. Here are my 4. I'll go into them a little bit of detail, and then I'll prattle on about them for a lot longer and bore you rigid with them. So there's, you probably know of these, but I'm just going to go over them anyway. Confirmation or affirmation bias. You know, there are, if you look at, I'll come back to this in a minute, but if you look at CPD online, it tells you there are 175 different types of bias. And if you look at something called virtualcapital.com, they say there are 188, but you know, there are a lot of them. And some of them might be duplicated, so that's why confirmation / affirmation bias. For me, they're the same thing. Some psychologists will probably say, oh no, they're different, but anyway. So this is where you tend to, you know, confirm your own beliefs. If you already think something, you'll hear stuff that, you'll accept stuff in that is to do with things you already know, and less stuff that you don't know. Framing bias, this is about, you know, you're influenced by the environment, so that kind of stuff. Groupthink bias, that's a lot in the papers at the moment. Everybody knows what groupthink is, so that's one of them. And then self-serving bias, or basically being selfish. So you kind of, you protect your own self-esteem by saying everything that goes right in your world is because of you, everything that goes wrong in your world is because of some outside factor. So here we go, a bit more detail then. So confirmation bias is everywhere. I'm sure all of you remember as a kid learning to do something and going, oh, I can't do this, I'll never be able to do this, and then, you know, proving it by, in this case, trying to learn how to play tennis and regularly hitting the ball in the net. You just kind of confirm your own view. In sales, we've all had presentations here, I've sat in them, where people say, when you're selling, you have to understand what your customer's problem is and then sell to that. Confirmation bias is one of the reasons for that, because you're saying, I can sell you what you already think you know, and they'll listen to you. If you go in and say, actually, you need a new computer system that does this, that, and the other, and they say, no, I want one that's the same as the old one, but better, then they're not going to listen to you as much as they would if you say, yeah, we do all of that. Politics is an obvious one, but you know, people shouting across the House of Commons, not listening to the people on the other side, always looking for things that support their view, even if they're exactly the same as they support the different words the people on the other side are saying. Slightly concerning, jury service. You know, if you have a preconceived idea of what the situation you're in might be like, from past experience or whatever, you could interpret evidence differently. Doctors, everyone knows, you go to the doctor and they say, oh, you've got a rash, it must be chlamydia or whatever it is. And then it turns out you've got cancer, skin cancer, because that's not what they're looking for. Their expectation in relationships, well, I've been married 32 years, and I think I've probably got loads of examples, but I haven't got long enough to tell you them all, so I'm not going to bother. So that's confirmation bias. Framing bias comes in different forms. So these headlines on the thing, you kind of, the Mail online, it would be the Mail, wouldn't it? Amazon bloodbath, they're letting go thousands of people, jobs, blah, blah, blah. Whereas this one is more isolated, but it's kind of certified. They're restructuring in order to hit their plan. It's a much different frame in the headline. You're going to read that article differently. So the words you use are important. You can do the same with pictures. People don't buy flash cleaning liquid based on an advert that's got a picture of a dark room with brown floors and grey work surfaces. Everything's white and clean and shiny, and there's a little bit of dirt that magically doesn't come off on the cloth but disappears eventually. And that's, people framing the thing, your expectations of what things can do. Sounds are the same, film music's obvious. You set the film and set up horror movies to me aren't particularly horrifying, but sometimes the music can make them seem horrifying because of the way it comes across. Mm-hmm. And then that's as a knowing. And then smells, everybody knows the one about, you sell your house by making it smell of freshly baked bread or coffee or whatever, not the sort of musty, damp smell that it normally smells of. Which is true of my daughter's flat, by the way. So that's framing bias. Where am I going with groupthink? So groupthink, I quite often come across businesses who say, oh, we've got no competition. None at all, we've got no competition, we're all great, blah, blah, blah. And the reason is they all tell themselves, because they've gone around thinking I need a USP, and that stands for unique, blah, blah, blah. They go, oh, we must be unique because we've got a USP. We've thought of it, we've told each other for 5 years that we've got a USP. We've got no competition. And they don't believe that there is competition for them because they're convinced of however hard you try. And then we all know the kind of echo chamber thing about social media, how that works and how you just got to listen to the voices and the weight of the voices behind you. It can be a bit dangerous though. So I don't know if any of you remember the 1986, I think it was 86 Challenger space shuttle disaster. So there was an engineer in NASA who, before this launch, said those O-rings won't take the cold. And because everybody in NASA said, no, we're NASA, we're perfect, everything's fine, we've all thought that, we've done it, they all denied, they all said, no, it's not. And they didn't listen and sent 7 people up to explode in the sky and come down in little bits like fireworks. So it can be a bad thing, a very bad thing. And then finally, self-serving bias. I think I kind of covered this earlier, but this is, we attribute our success to things we've done. We attribute our failures to things other people have done. Paul was saying earlier, some things happen. Yes, things happen, but it's always the negative stuff that happens. You don't fortuitously have the traffic opening up in front of you, you get there. It's only traffic jams that cause you to be late. Your planning is what gets you there early. And then we always recall past events in a way that shows us in a positive light. And all of this frames how you see the world. So nobody's listening. I mean, even if people say they understand, quite often they don't. They just use that word. My wife said to me, I hear you, the other day, which meant I hung up on her because I got quite upset because obviously she didn't. We've made up since, it's okay. Before you start talking, if you get an invitation to a meeting or you make an invitation to a meeting, the way you invite people might set their expectation about what you're going to talk about. So, I don't know, I've got something important to talk to you about in relation to your ongoing employment. And the person goes to the meeting thinking they're going to be sacked, and you say, I'm going to give you a 25% pay rise. Their expectation of what they think is going to happen and then it goes, well, you're not going to sack me then, and you go a whole negative route when you don't have to. Then the same with the group thing. If people are outside your tribe, if you're from outside their tribe, they aren't going to listen because there's 200 people in their tribe and there's only one of you. And then, what was my last one? Oh yeah, the listener who thinks they know everything. In fact, I was speaking to one this morning on the way over here. He's a self-made millionaire businessman, has a 16 million turnover business that makes him $1 million a year. He built his business up from nothing and he knows everything there is to know about his business. He will tell me over and over and over and over and over again what is possible in his business. He is always, kind of right. And that's fair enough. Most of the time he is. But then he employs me to tell him other stuff. Doesn't really work. It's quite frustrating. So I think nobody's listening, and probably most of the time they aren't. But you'll be pleased to know there is hope. Really, honestly. So I like this book. It's Time to Think. It's a lady called Nancy Klein. She's quite a well-known business presenter guru type person. And her work is, in this case, all about creating a thinking environment, which for me has resonance with helping people communicate as well. So there's also a more time to think as well. And I'm sure pretty soon there'll be an even more time to think. So in this book, this is the 30% thing. She reported a study in London where they got businesses to create a thinking environment around their boardroom tables. And these businesses at the end of the study reported being 30% more productive than they were without a thinking environment. So I kind of think that's worth clinging on to and going. And for me, it's not just about businesses and boardrooms, it's also about one-to-one conversations. And that. What it means is you have to create a thinking environment. That means spending time creating a thinking environment. And people think that time isn't worth it. But if you're going to get a 30% return, it probably is. So anyway, what is a thinking environment? How do you create one? Well, you have to treat people equally. I struggle with the word equally a little bit because it doesn't necessarily mean, it maybe equitably would be a better way, but give everybody their their opportunity to say their thing and go through their ideas. Pay attention to what they're saying. Don't just kind of go, I know what they're going to say, so I'll shut off now. Everybody says that. Ask them the questions that help you understand what they're saying. Make sure you really do understand what they're saying. Don't just kind of go, oh, I've just said that. They say that every time. Take a bit of time to understand. And that's the next bit, is ask incisive questions. Ask those questions that get to the root of what they're trying to say and help you understand. Don't put your own agenda aside, put your own thoughts aside. Properly spend time understanding the other people in the room. Give everybody enough time to get to the end of what they have to say. Some people waffle on me and talk forever, hoping that somebody will eventually understand at least one of the words that they like. Other people will say things very succinctly and quickly and you'll get it. Or at least you think you'll get it. Ask a couple of questions, check, but everybody needs to get to the end of what they're saying. The nugget might be at the end. Make sure there's enough information around, that you've got as best information as you can. It's good information, it's reliable, you can make decisions based on that. Show some appreciation. Welcome the fact that other people are contributing. The fact that they're just making an effort is a good thing. Especially in a meeting where not one, quite often you go and one person just kind of holds court and off you go. If you get to a point where you can say, actually, thank you for your contribution, I understand what's really valuable, but blah, blah, you have to mean it. Not like I sound as if I don't mean anything I say, but they kind of, you know what I mean? It's that sort of thing. People have feelings. Sometimes when somebody says, I just don't feel right about that, they don't feel right for a reason, but they can't put the words on why they don't feel right about it. And those are the ones you need to try and ask. In your thinking environment, you try and get people, draw them out of people. Try and get them to explain somehow by asking them questions. Don't tell them why you think it wouldn't feel right for you. Figure out why it doesn't feel right for them. Diversity of thought is really important. It's not just about having different colours, different faces, different sexes, different this, that and the other. It's actually the whole thing that comes having different backgrounds, different people coming from different angles, and just kind of say, let's not think the way we always think, let's try and think differently. And it's quite hard. The more diverse the views you've got in the room, if you want to listen to them, the better. A load of people like me who've all done the same thing all their life probably isn't going to get you the best decision. But hang back to the 30% more productive thing. Encourage people. Not everyone's going to get it from the word go. And then create a space where the world is conducive to think. Again, if you do it in a dark room with spotlight shining at one person's head at a time, it's not really going to go down very well, is it? On the other hand, nice bright airy room with plants around and make it feel as if you're all comfortable and you've got time and there's energy, positive energy in the room, it will help. So what have I learned really? Well, I've learned that if I understand people more, then maybe they will understand me more. I think it works in meetings, but it also, it's possible to do it on a one-to-one basis. It's even possible to do it with yourself, sort of. It's one of the few things you can do with yourself in public that you don't get in trouble for. And so that's my big learning. And really, if you want help doing this kind of stuff, get a coach. A coach will ask you incisive questions. A coach will help you with that kind of thinking environment and create. A really good coach won't be a mentor and won't tell you what they think, don't tell you their experience. They will just focus on you and helping you think. And that's what I think, that's what coaching is for me, that's what I do for a living. And anyway, I recommend you get a coach. Ta-da.